Man, our test is tomorrow and I still don't know the difference between deterministic and stochastic effects.
Ah, that's the least of your worries. We also need to learn about all these early radiation workers and the physiological responses they had from ionizing radiation. I was looking up information on them, but all I find is stuff about their life accomplishments. I can't find specific information about how their work with radiation affected them.
I wish we could just talk to the people and get their perspective of what happened.
Well, it's not like we could travel back in time. Because, they are dead, right? And likely died as a result of their work from working with ionizing radiation.
What? You can die from this stuff? You know we're going to school for radiography. Don't we work with ionizing radiation? Doesn't that mean being a radiologic technologist is dangerous?
Yes, ionizing radiation can be dangerous, but we understand so much more about it now that we can use it in a safe manner where the benefits outweigh the dangers.
How do you know that? And how did you learn so much about radiation?
I know that because I actually study. I mean, a lot of our understanding of how ionizing radiation works were from discoveries from early radiation workers made, and studying their effects their exposure to it had on them.
So we should be thankful for these people and for our career in the field because of them.
Exactly.
Well, so let's respect their sacrifices by studying for our test. And when I say studying for our test, I mean teach me stuff so I don't fail.
All right, let's start at the basics. Do you know what separates ionizing radiation from other forms of radiation?
Nope, I just thought that's how smart people say x-rays.
It's gonna be a long day. It's called ionizing radiation because when it interacts with matter, it ionizes atoms. Ionizing an atom means it loses one of its electrons. I know it doesn't sound like a big deal, but those small molecular changes can have a serious biological ramifications.
Oh, is that like the stochastic and deterministic biological responses?
Yeah, exactly. What do you know about stochastic and deterministic responses?
Why don't you tell me what you know about stochastic and deterministic responses?
All right. Well, deterministic responses happen after someone is exposed to a minimum amount of ionizing radiation. It has a threshold if you would, but don't worry, the threshold for deterministic responses are much higher than anything we'll be exposed to in our career.
Would that be a result from being exposed to an acute dose of radiation?
Yeah, because an acute dose of radiation is when someone is exposed to so much radiation, then their cells don't have time to recover from it.
So then what's a chronic dose of radiation?
It's when someone is repeatedly exposed to ionizing radiation over a long period of time. It's typically associated with stochastic effects, even though acute doses can also produce stochastic effects.
So how can we tell that ionizing radiation causes stochastic effects?
Well, there isn't enough research to make a definitive correlation between ionizing radiation and stochastic effects, but what is known about how cells react and through population studies, it's safer to make the assumption that any amount of ionizing radiation is dangerous.
Well, that covers a lot about what's going to be on the test. Now we just have to learn about the specific early radiation workers.
Did somebody say time travel?
That was 10 minutes ago.
Kids these days are so ungrateful. Well, you guys have a test to pass, so here's this time travel apron. Good luck on your travels.
Thank you. Let's go visit Clarence Daly then.
Let's do it! Our next destination to talk with Clarence Daly and his experience with being Thomas Edison's assistant and what struggles he faced leading up to his death.
Whoa, we actually time traveled?
Or did we?
I think I see someone over there. Let's check it out.
Hey, you're that assistant guy, right?
I beg your pardon? How did you get in here?
Forgive my partner's manners. My name is Taylor and this is Philippe. Philippe and I wanted to know if you are Clarence Daly, the assistant of Thomas Edison. We were sent by the New York Times newspaper.
Yes, I am. All right, what would you like for me to speak about?
What are you and Mr. Edison working on?
Something related to Röntgen's discovery of X-rays in 1895, of course. It's phenomenal. Mr. Edison and I are trying to improve the fluorescent lamp.
Have you received any injuries by chance?
Yes, I've lost hair on my head, eyebrows, and eyelashes. Also, I've recently lost my left hand, mostly because a bit of carcinoma had been found at the base of my pinky. Now I have some reddening and swelling on my right hand and some ulceration, which is why I have a medical appointment today to amputate 4 of my fingers. Don't worry though, it won't prevent me from assisting Mr. Edison.
We're very sorry to hear that.
By any chance, is the condition that happened to your left hand before you unfortunately lost it the same going on with your right hand?
Why, yes, including some ulcerations. It's coincidental, I'm sure.
Can you tell us about any treatment that you've had?
In the past, I have tried having a skin graft from my leg to help heal my hand, but it was such in vain because there was a lack of growth with my cells, as I have been told. Because of that and such progression of what is happening, I've had to have my hand amputated. Please forgive me, I've had enough to talk about today. It's very hard to talk about. Please excuse me, I must be going.
Thank you for your time.
Good day to you too.
He's a nice guy, with a tragic fate. I almost forgot that in this time period they don't know much about x-rays. They don't realize how harmful it can be.
I agree. Okay, so what did we learn?
Considering that when he tried to use the skin graft, his cells couldn't recover and repair themselves to the point, which would point to erythema, which is a deterministic effect. The carcinoma, the cancer part of his hand, it can be viewed as a stochastic effect. But we can't be sure that it was caused by his exposure to x-rays. Since he had been working for quite some time with x-rays, he had chronic radiation exposure as well, and the visible symptoms on his hands, like the redness and also the loss of hair on his head, would be a deterministic effect.
Yes. Do you remember what Miss Angel told us about his arms?
He had one of his arms amputated at the shoulder and the other arm amputated at the elbow. He died October 1904, and that's all I remember.
Okay, let's go visit Marie Curie.
Let's go.
Now traveling to visit Marie Curie live in action with her contribution to the application of X-ray in the battlefield.
Who would be in a battlefield?
Marie Curie, I think that's her.
Marie Curie?
Yes, how can I help you?
My name is Taylor, and this is my partner Philippe. We know you are very busy right now, but could we take a few minutes of your time to ask you a bit about yourself and about your work with radium and X-rays?
Sure you can. Where shall we begin?
Where were you born and where did you study?
Well, I was born in Warsaw, Poland in 1867, but I moved to study at the Sorbonne in Paris, where I met my husband Pierre Curie.
What did you and Pierre study in Paris?
Together, Pierre and I worked on experimenting with scientist Henry Becquerel's discovery of a glow that would come from uranium salts using an electrometer. Through this, we learned that the glow was being caused by an uranium atom, which would emit particles because of it having an unstable nucleus. I like to call this radioactivity. Pierre and I received a Nobel Prize in Physics in 1903 from this discovery.
Did you make any other discoveries?
Yes, because I experimented with radioactive materials and spent a lot of my time breaking them down, I discovered 2 elements called radium and polonium. I also received a Nobel Prize in chemistry from the discovery in 1911.
Sounds like you were really busy.
I would spend hours, days, and years surrounded by these radioactive elements. Over time, I would feel extremely fatigued. I lost weight and became anemic. Pierre would feel extremely fatigued too and got body pains.
If you were experimenting with radioactive elements, what brought you to World War I?
When World War I began, I realized that there was a need to help the surgeons of wounded soldiers on the battlefield. Because of this problem, I invented a possible solution called Petite Curies. They are mobile radiography units that allow surgeons to x-ray the wounded and get them into surgery as soon as possible. I also had other radiography units installed into field hospitals. This is what I'm doing here. I'm training other women how to use the units so I can continue to produce more of them.
Wow, well, we'll let you get back to helping the wounded. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for yours. Goodbye.
Did Murray say that she developed anemia while she was experimenting with radioactive elements? Might that be related to aplastic anemia, the cause of her death?
Yes, people from this time period weren't aware of the harmful effects radiation had on the body, so they weren't using any protective measures from radiation. Marie and Pierre may have been experiencing the symptoms that they did as stochastic effects to their chronic exposures to ionizing radiation, which unfortunately Marie Curie later died from.
As interesting as the history of radiation can be, it's also very scary because of how little people knew about the effects of radiation.
It really is. Luckily, we were able to learn from this history and apply protective measures to ourselves and our patients when we become radiographers.
That's true. Who are we visiting next?
Lois Slayton.
Let's go!
Now traveling back to May of 1946 to see what was going on in Lois Slotin's mind when getting ready to do this experiment involving the well-known Demon Core.
Hey, you're Lois Slotin, right?
Yes, I'm Lois Slotin.
Would you mind telling me a little bit about yourself?
I grew up in the north end of Winnipeg. I pursued my degree in science at the University of Manitoba, where I received a gold medal in both physics and chemistry. However, my expertise was in radiobiology.
Oh, I see. Because of your expertise in radiobiology, what happened from there?
Well, I got attention from the United States government, and so they asked me to join the Manhattan Project.
What's the Manhattan Project?
Basically, we were trying to develop a nuclear bomb, so in December 1944, I moved to New Mexico to work in the bomb physics group at Los Alamos National Laboratory.
And what were your duties at the laboratory?
My job was very important. I tested with uranium and later with plutonium cores. The other scientists referred to this as the tickling the dragon's tail. But on July 16, 1945, I assembled the first detonated atomic device and became known as the Chief Armorer of the United States.
Okay, so tell me about the accident that happened on May 21st, 1946.
Well, I was performing an experiment that involved the creation of one of the first steps of a fission reaction. I did this by placing 2 half spheres of beryllium around a plutonium core.
Is that the same plutonium core that went critical and irradiated Harry K. Daglin Jr.?
Yes, we called it the Demon Core. Anyways, I grasped the upper 9-inch beryllium hemisphere with my left hand through a thumb hole, and I used a screwdriver to separate the spheres. However, the screwdriver was not a normal part of this protocol. Then later in the afternoon, the screwdriver slipped and the upper hemisphere fell, causing a reaction and a burst of hard radiation.
Did you see anything after it fell?
My colleagues said they saw a blue glow and felt a heat wave.
How did it feel?
I felt a sour taste in my mouth and left my hand feeling like it was burning.
Do you know how much radiation you received?
Unfortunately, all our dosimetry badges were locked in a box about 100 feet away from the accident, so no one had their film badges on. Because of that, we never knew how much dose any of the men received.
So what happened after the accident?
Once I left the building, I immediately threw up.
That's a common reaction from exposure to intense radiation.
Yes, and so my colleagues rushed me to the hospital, and from there, massive damage was already done. Over the next 9 days, I had severe diarrhea, swollen hands, blisters on my hands and forearms. I also couldn't pee. On top of that, I had gangrene.
What's gangrene?
It's dead tissue caused by an infection of lack of blood flow. It actually provides evidence hematopoietic radiation syndrome, where the bone marrow is irradiated to a point where it cannot sufficiently produce blood cells.
Do you know what happened to your other colleagues?
I remember Alvin C. Graves was standing closest to me. He developed acute radiation sickness and went to the hospital too.
Oh, I see. So because you received such a high dose of radiation, these early deterministic somatic effects occurred, and your colleagues would likely experience stochastic effects from the high dose of ionizing radiation.
There you go. You sound ready for Miss Angel's test. Well, thank you for your time, Lois Houghton.
Thank you both.
cut.
Yeah, cut.